Haryana, a bus was traveling. The name of that bus was Rights Express. And the passengers of those bus were different constitutional rights. Right of privacy, right against exploitation, right to equality. All of them used to travel in that bus together. But one fine day, as that bus was rumbling through the city, a small quarrel started amongst the rides. And this quarrel soon turned into a brawl, and then the conductor of the bus, Dignity, had to step in. Dignity gathered all these rights in a circle and explained to them that we are all on a constitutional journey and we are not in competition with each other, but rather we are intertwined in such a manner that we make the society just and fair. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 6.5 minutes, I shall present to you 4 constructives to further explain my point and further strengthen my argument that human dignity is indeed a fundamental right.
Your name?
My name is Parth Narayan Singh, and ladies and gentlemen, I come from Uttaranchal University. As I stand in this majestic hall, I shall first talk about the US Constitution, the oldest constitution in the world. It is indeed a very fascinating fact that several decades after the US Constitution was enacted, that slavery and sale of African American Negroes persisted in the United States. Now here is my argument, ladies and gentlemen. Was dignity not a constitutional value in the US Constitution when it was first enacted? Of course it was. But it was not until the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment and the famous Griswold versus Connecticut case that the Supreme Court of the United States made sure that dignity is indeed a human right and slavery came to be abolished. What I mean to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that dignity, being a constitutional value, could not even save its own citizens. Dignity, as soon as it became a constitutional right, became a wielding tool in the hands of the African Americans and abolished slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin my other constructives, we need to make sure what is the distinction and what is the connection between dignity and law. In the year 1938, ladies and gentlemen, when Jews were being taken into concentration camps by the Nazis, there was once a Jew who was being held in a camp in Argentina. And there was also a rabbi, that is a Judaism priest in that concentration camp. The Jew was very devout. He wrote to the rabbi and asked him that whether I should fast on the day of Yom Kippur or not. Yom Kippur is the date of fasting in Judaism. And the Jew replied, and the rabbi replied, and he could have given a very rational answer, ladies and gentlemen. He could have said that because you are under duress, because you are kept in a concentration camp, you do not need to fast. But he made a very peculiar statement. He made a statement that gives a beautiful connection between dignity and law as you know it. He said that me and you, we both are outside the purview of law. Because we have been degraded to such an extent that we are not humans and law applies to humans. Ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what was happening to the people in the United States before human dignity became a constitutional right. Now I will move on to my second constructive, ladies and gentlemen. That is, what is the exact distinction between a constitutional right and a constitutional value? In modern interpretative theory, we have 2 major concepts of interpreting a constitutional text. The first is intentionalism and the second is purposivism. In intentionalism, we look at the intent of the lawmakers, and in purposivism, we look at the purpose which the law serves. Now, when our constitution was framed in 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly said that fundamental rights are the gift of gods. And I believe not even an atheist will doubt this, that dignity is a gift of God. And in purposive interpretation, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is that any constitutional text is interpreted in light of human dignity as a value, which means human dignity is reduced to a primarily interpretational text. For example, what I mean to say is that suppose there is a statute X, and if it violates a human dignity as a constitutional value, then it might or it might not be unconstitutional. But if it violates human dignity as a constitutional right, then it becomes unconstitutional at that very instance owing to Article 13. Respected chair and jury, I shall move on to my third argument. And my third argument is that when the famous philosopher Immanuel Kant was talking about dignity, he said that dignity in humans should be absolute. Absolute in the sense that a man should decide when he wants to live, where he wants to live, how he wants to live, and when he wants to die. The Indian Constitution gives the rights to its citizens who reside in any part of the country. The Indian Constitution gives the right to its citizens to practice any profession they want, to practice any religion they want, to practice any person they want. And And also, in the famous case of Common Cause versus Union of India, the Indian Supreme Court held the right to die with dignity is also a fundamental right. Ladies and gentlemen, what I mean to say is that to understand whether human dignity is a constitutional value or a constitutional right in our constitution, we need to see outside the cave and look at what impact dignity has had on our constitution in the last 75 years. Which brings me to my next point. Now, some of my worthy opponents here will argue that because dignity is not expressly written in a constitution, it is not a right. To that I ask, ladies and gentlemen, basic structure is nowhere mentioned in a constitution. Right to privacy is nowhere mentioned in a constitution. Right to clean drinking water, right to sleep, right to have access to public roads. These are not mentioned in a constitution, but they are still rights. No sane mind in this room will deny that we do not have these rights. Ladies and gentlemen, a very strong argument that has been made in this room is that right to dignity is so vast that it should be a value. To that I ask, ladies and gentlemen, that fundamental duties are also values, but they are not enforceable in a country. You cannot go in a court and say that because such and such fundamental duty is not being followed, or prosecute a certain person or prosecute the state. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stand in this majestic hall and as we all sit here together, it's a very coincidence that 4 countries are at war with each other right now, and 3 of them have human dignity as a written constitutional fundamental right in the constitution, and all 4 of them are making a mockery out of it. What I mean to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that my worthy opponents are making very stupid rationale that because it is not a right, written right, it does not exist. Ladies and gentlemen, what I mean to say is that when Nalsa versus Union of India case came, the Supreme Court recognized the rights of transgender. Did it not in itself imbibe the idea of Article 21? When we have Article 21A, which gives the right to education, did it not itself imbibe the idea of human dignity? Surprisingly, ladies and gentlemen, I agree with the statement of my worthy opponents that human dignity is not a fundamental right. Human dignity is the fundamental right, which is the ink that penned every other right in our constitution. Thank you so much.
Questions?
But you never advocated or explicitly stated what dignity implies, what dignity actually means. Because of me, dignity is a very vague and absolute term, right? If something as substantial as a constitution of the country does not have substantiated elements in it, how do you put that particular thing as part of it?
Thank you so much for such a beautiful question, sir. I think you did not pay attention to the first part of my speech where I was talking about the story of the Jew and the rabbi. The rabbi made it very clear that dignity, law, everything applies to humans. And when I mentioned Immanuel Kant, he said that dignity is absolute. It is the meaning of dignity is what a person decides to do for himself, he should be able to do. In a positive sense, of course, that you should not be able to harm others. I'll give a very good example, sir. In the Roman Empire, there was once a king, maybe this story is a myth, but the story is a very famously goes in Venice, that there was a very king who was very advocative of rights, but he was always afraid that if his pupils speak ill about him, they might be persecuted. So in his kingdom, he made a small park, sir. And in that park, he said that everyone in this park has absolute right. Now, sir, there's a famous saying that in Rome be Roman. And Rome has vanished. We do not have absolute dignity. We do not have absolute right. We do not have absolute duties. So the whole concept of dignity, of course, sir, it is a very vague concept, but I would not demean it by saying that it is a vague concept. It is a very lengthy concept, which in itself is a very researched matter.
So the tale of Rabbi and a Jew, or
Sir, in the first part of your speech, you mentioned obvious war crimes, and you mentioned obvious persecution that was presented to the Jews. Do you really think that in Germany, wherein if it would have been a fundamental right, human dignity would have been awarded to the Jews, or do you think in any other war zone right now? You yourself contradicted yourself in the latter part of your speech by disagreeing with your first statement. So what do you say about that?
Sir, I did not contradict myself. I said that 3 countries have expressly written that human dignity is a fundamental right, but they are not following that. I was talking about our constitution, that our constitution does not necessarily needs to write it down in our constitution. We do not need the decorative point. And sir, I will come to the war crime thing if you want me to. Or you have a further question?
I have a further question with regard to.
Do you want me to answer this or do you want me to answer in totality?
In totality, then.
Alright.
So the next part is you said that it's not basic structure and a lot of questions of law are not explicitly written in our constitution, but they are backed by precedent. They are backed by the Supreme Court explicitly saying that this is now a fundamental right. So this we cannot award to human dignity because the courts have actively avoided talking about human dignity as a fundamental right. If you could answer both of the questions.
Right, sir.